And welcome back to Pastor Plek's podcast. So glad all of you are joining us as we're recording live here in Austin, Texas. And we're going to be talking about our Love One Another series, what we're doing at Wells Branch Community Church. I'm Pastor Plek, and I have just to my right here, Super Trooper Nicole Troup. How are you, Nicole?
I'm good.
And Muhammad Ali, the original, formerly Cassius Clay, is now with us. Actually, he's not formerly Cassius Clay. He's just the original Muhammad Ali. So glad that you're here, Muhammad.
You.
And then also we have Jordan Smith.
Howdy.
You know, he is our live stream producer. And without that, you would probably not know all the greatness that comes across the airwaves and the internet.
Yeah, I help with these podcasts, too, when I'm not on them.
That's right. So we're so grateful for that. So I want to talk real quick. We went through the book of Philemon, which is sort of, I think that was Mo's idea. Wasn't it your idea?
Maybe.
Yeah,
Great idea, Mo.
It was a great idea. Mo kind of came up with it. We were wrestling with how do we, because we really were starting the series from Romans 12, I think verses 9 through 13. It was kind of like outdo one another or love one another, outdo one another in showing honor, bless those who persecute you, rejoice with those who rejoice, weep with those who weep, show hospitality, all that. And so we were like, what could really be something that would be showing honor? And we came up with Philemon.
A book that no one has ever heard of.
Right. Nobody knew what that book was. In fact, I think Philemon was quoted several times in this past week, as I have some people that were reading. It was pretty funny.
I think it's Old Testament, too.
Yeah. It got Old Testament. It was in the Old Testament. It was fun. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with Philemon, I think it's after Titus and before Hebrews. And it was just like a fun book to get into. And we're talking about Philemon in that Paul honors Philemon, who is a slave owner back in, the 1st century AD. And then Philemon has to honor Onesimus with setting him free, is what Paul asks him to do. And then Onesimus has to honor Paul in going. And just imagine you ran away from slavery for a reason, which was penalty of death type stuff. And you're like, no, I'll head on back. So there's a lot of submitting to, Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And that's not just in marriage, although that's a great place for it, but it's also in Christianity. And so here you see that really clearly. And so Pastor Mo, talk to me just when you read this letter, what are some things that stick out to you in terms of honoring one another and those the relationship dynamics?
Yeah, I think it's very countercultural. I think today we kind of get lost in this idea of liberty and freedom and being able to do whatever it is that you want to do. And obviously slavery as an evil institution. Right. But that is in the 21st century. Right. So for anybody at that time to say that, hey, you deserve, or not deserve, but ask your master to
set you free,
to free you, and then after you ran away, and then for you to come back and to serve me is preposterous.
It's wild.
Yeah.
Let's talk about 1st century slavery for a second. I don't know, this is where I'm putting you on the spot. How familiar with are you 1st century slavery? Pretty good. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about 1st century slavery. What was it like to be a slave, and how did you become a slave?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it in the sermon, and when we were going through it, it wasn't ethnic. Right. It was based on class. It was for a period of time, and even in the Old Testament, you had laws for how to treat slaves. Right. And it was always with the intention, with the goal of freedom, whether in 7 years or the Jubilee in a long time, where everybody gets set free.
And the whole purpose, within the Old Testament, you were always to honor the Imago Dei within every person, which is the image. They're still imagers of God, even if they were slaves. Yes. But I think for some people, when I talked about slavery and I said, we're not going to get into, antebellum slavery here in America, and I could just feel people rifting, why not? That's the whole, we got to. Sure. But I think that it's bigger than that, because I think when you talk about kingdom of heaven perspective, I think this is what's hard for people, and maybe you guys could chime into this. It's so above the culture. And I know that's sort of a wild thing to think about. It's what we're trying to do is bring heaven to earth, right? So your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And what we're doing is we're saying we want to live as ambassadors for the kingdom of God, not to try and change institutions, although institutions will change when we change hearts as a byproduct.
Yeah.
So I think we touched on that. You could get into, in that day and age, slavery would happen through war. Slavery would happen through, you could sell yourself into slavery if you wanted to pay off some debt. So it was, which is, I would think, a wild thought. But like if you're like on the verge of being homeless, or you're like, let's see. And here's the other thing. Whenever Rome conquered nations or peoples, they would make them slaves, and it actually created mob rule. So one of the things that I've just, in my spare time of reading about first century Rome, I actually did read about this, is that they would have 500,000, they'd take 500,000 slaves at a time, and they'd make them agrarian slaves. Now, it wasn't race-based, but they did much of the same work that antebellum slavery in America, African-American slavery happened in the U.S. And what they would do is they put small farmers out of business. So it was like literally like the government putting small businesses out of business to consolidate more power, and that created sort of a mob mentality, and then sort of created a riot thing. So slavery, any form of slavery, is ultimately going to end up for the worst for the culture if you kind of go at it as a large, grandiose way of sort of consolidating power, because it's going to create enemies for you no matter what. So I think that's not only is slavery bad because it really deteriorates and mars the image of God in a person, however, but it's also bad economically.
Sure.
In the longer. Now, we don't need to jump on that grenade anymore. But anyway, so going back to that, Nicole, anything that stuck out to you from Philemon of just of this asking for Philemon to release, to set free a slave. What stuck out to you in that?
The fact that you use this book at all stuck out to me. like it's a book that, like, I was like, are you saying Philippians wrong? Like, that was my I was like, are you sure this is a book of the Bible, Chris? And it's like one of those, it's like one chapter, and it's like one page, and like you wouldn't know it's there because it gets stuck between like two bigger books or whatever.
Right.
And so the fact that you even use this, and I'll be honest, like when we were in preaching practice or preaching planning with this, I was like, how are you going to make this about loving people? And you did, but like it was actually there. Like I guess the whole thing stuck out to me. Like, Paul does crazy stuff all the time. So the fact that he was like sending back a slave, it like morally makes sense. Like, you're not just gonna like steal somebody's slave and be like, you're free now or whatever. Like, morally
Because you still
it makes
have
sense.
a governmental responsibility under the government authorities and all
exactly.
that.
And
even
that's
if
like
it's
100% Paul.
dark. And also, it just...
But like Paul knew Philemon.
Right.
Like, he wasn't sending Onesimus back to someone who wasn't a believer or something like that.
Right.
So I think Paul, in some sense, probably had some faith that Philemon would respond positively to this. But like, the part that really got me was the part that you pointed out where like Paul asked, he didn't command.
Yeah.
Which is also like so not Paul. Like Paul's letters in other places are just like rife with like conviction and commandments and like, or, encouragements. Like he goes the other way sometimes too, but like most of it is like really, really like convicting and like, why are you doing this? This is...
Stop it.
Stop this. This is...
Bob Newhart counseling.
This is the, this is what Jesus said, and you're not following what Jesus said. But, like, he really does, like, appeal to Philemon's character.
Yeah.
And in that way, like you were saying, honors him.
He does. What about you, Jordan? Anything stick out for you that just sort of, like, you got sort of excited about, or just was like, that was odd? Anything that stuck out to you?
Yeah, I think for me, the thing that stood out mostly is just, I think you said Onesimus means useless, right?
Useful, which is sort of weird. And he says that
Okay.
one, like, in the past, he was useless to you, but now he's useful, and it's Onesimus, which is
Right, so I'm thinking of Philemon, he loses his slave, like, I don't know how long he was gone, but just trying to put myself in that situation, I'd be really pissed off, right? Like, and he comes back, And Paul says, this probably all happened for a reason because now he's going to be your brother and useful to you. And it just reminds me of, Romans 8:28 of where, all bad things work for the good of those who love God.
Yeah.
Or all things, I should say, work. But just that, in that situation, I try to put myself in Philemon's shoes and I'd be really pissed off for a while until, later down the road, you're like, oh, so this is kind of why that happened. And, see more of God's plan unraveling in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he became a pastor and a great pastor. In fact, some say he was a pastor of the Ephesian church, but there's, in Turkey, modern day Turkey or Galatia at that time, he really had a lot of influence and
Philemon or
Onesimus.
Onesimus. Okay.
So you imagine that you never know what doing the right thing is going to accomplish in spurring on the gospel going forward. And I think that's what really happened with Onesimus being a church leader back in the day. Okay, so I do want to get to the questions that we had from this week. And so I'll start with anybody who wants to jump in on this, feel free. Are we all really going to get a crown in heaven? So I mentioned it was a just off the cuff comment. Even God honors us. The ultimate creator who is above all things is so unbelievable. He stoops to honor us, which is wild in a couple ways. He says, well done, good and faithful servant. And then he even gives us a crown, which is, I thought, sort of an odd thing, which one, of course, we'll throw down. But the question then comes, aren't the four crowns all ones to be earned? Meaning, I don't think any of us are guaranteed to get any one or more. Anyone want to say anything about that before I dive into some thoughts?
What crowns
Crown him. That's the wrong song.
is he
That's
referring,
not-
or
that's
is
for
this person referring to?
Okay, so there's 5 crowns, actually. There's the imperishable crown. That's 1 Corinthians 9. There's the crown of rejoicing in 1 Thessalonians 2. There's a crown of righteousness in 2 Timothy 4. There's a crown of glory in 1 Peter 5. And there's a crown of life. So all of these, my interpretation, seems to be for all people. So 1 Corinthians 9, 24, 25. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one who receives a prize, but only one receives a prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it, meaning this is a general all. He's writing to the Corinthian church. And everyone who competes for the prizes can be disciplined in all things. Now, they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. So I look at that and I'm like, we are going for the imperishable crown.
Sure.
To which someone might say, well, can they not get it?
Doesn't sound like it. It sounds like it's synonymous with salvation.
That's what I think of it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, and I think the crown of rejoicing, for what is our hope or joy or crown of rejoicing? Is it not even you in the presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that is coming? And he's speaking about that the very thing that he's excited about was these people were his crown of rejoicing. So
This is like a metaphorical
it,
crown.
it's a crown, but I could kind of see it as like, hey, way to go. Instead of notches in the belt buckle, you get a crown. Okay.
But okay.
But I thought that's fun. Mo,
Yeah.
you're not laughing with me.
Yeah, it's all right.
I mean, there are lots of like.
Mo's face is the toughest one to read. Here's Mo when he's happy.
Nah, you're right.
Here's Mo when he's sad. And only if he gives you a ha 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 laugh that you're sort of like, is that condescending right now? I don't know. So that I think that might have been more metaphorical. But
It reminds me a lot of like other things, like wisdom is a treasure in Proverbs, and like salvation is the great reward, and like storing your treasure in heaven, and it like that's kind of the ring that it has to me.
No,
like,
I agree. Okay,
Yeah.
so that one may not be an actual tiara. It would
Wait, so
probably
are
be.
you saying you think all people receive all of these crowns?
Yeah, I do. So so that one was only for him specifically because it was actually the people that were his crown. So, that. All right, so in 2 Timothy 4, there's laid up a crown for me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. And not to me only, but also all those who have loved his appearing.
Yeah, it's every Christian.
That sounds to me like salvation.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm like, he's honoring us with the crown because that's what. Anyway, so the crown of glory, and when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that does not fade away. He's addressing the elders, but I feel like
Sounds like you'll get a crown when Jesus comes.
Yeah, I mean, he's addressing the elders, meaning like the elders of the church he was writing to. But to me, I feel like that's another salvation one. The crown of life, Revelation 2:10. Do not fear any of those things which you're about to suffer. Indeed, the devil's about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and you have tribulation 10 days. But be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. This crown this one you could say, well, that's because this was written to a specific church about to go through persecution, but I think it's for those who endure sufferings, bravely confront persecution, even the point of death. I don't know. That one I'd say maybe that one's more for our martyrs, but
Yeah.
still even that one you could probably go it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then you've got James 1:12. What is James 1:12? That is, blessed the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. So I feel like that's everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's why I went with the it's an everybody thing, because I feel like it's an everybody thing. You're going to get a crown. God wants to honor you.
Yeah.
Honor people.
Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Here's the next question. Was Paul writing this from prison, and was it like a house arrest type setup where he had servants and things like that? Pastor Mo, do you want to take that one on when he wrote it's called the prison epistles, which is Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon.
Okay. He was in prison for some of the pastoral ones too, right?
That's where he was like in a jail cell that was really awful. For this one, yeah, he's about to die. On this one, it's more like house arrest.
Gotcha.
And on that one, I like you have servants and things. Well, you don't actually have, like, they don't give you servants in your house. It's like you get to stay in a house. You're chained up to a Roman guard. You can't leave, but people can come and go to serve you. Because it's not like you can go get a job, or you have to have like work from the internet.
Why was he put on that sort of house arrest rather than in jail?
That is a great question.
Is the house arrest like earlier in his life?
Yeah, so I don't
Okay.
think that
So
we
maybe he
hadn't
hadn't been
had
offensive
Rome
enough
burned.
yet.
Rome hadn't burned down and blamed Christians yet. So this was probably a relatively new religious thing. It's probably like what happens when you go out on bail. Hey, don't leave the city. Don't leave the country. In fact, we're gonna put this Roman soldier on you. Don't leave. And
Paul was also a Roman citizen, wasn't he?
He was, and so you get
Maybe that
special
has something to
treatment,
do
which
with
is like a big deal. It's you don't just get put in, Gen Pop when you're a Roman citizen.
Wow.
Okay. So great question. Okay, then last one. You spoke about my sacrifice for their benefit. I totally get that, and try every time the person is near, meaning the person that I guess that is near to them. Yet isn't there a fine line between that and boundaries? We're not God, and eventually you break because you're not a doormat, and you have to stand up for yourself because those people you try to give the benefit to continually treat you poorly, even though we strive to be and live like Christ. When is enough while still showing love? This is a great question.
This
I mean,
is a
this
great
is like
question.
this is like Peter asking Jesus, should
I
I
love it.
forgive him 7 times?
Like,
Up
that's
to
a lot.
7 times?
Like, yeah, I mean,
and then Jesus says
70 times 7.
70 times 7.
And he's like, oh, so 490. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, but what if they're not a believer?
Well, that's a great question.
I don't think it's conditional.
Yeah.
I think trust should be with wisdom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But forgiveness, love, honor, I think that's unconditional.
Specifically honor, which we were talking about from this.
Yeah.
You've
Yeah.
got to give everybody honor. And it's hard because people do wrong things. Now, here's what I will say. When I confront someone in sin,
That's still honoring.
that is honoring
Yeah,
them
absolutely,
and
absolutely.
loving them. And I think what we hear when we say love, honor, we hear be nice. And I think there's
I hate the word nice.
Yeah. And I don't think our church is like this. At least I hope we're not like this. I think there's this reality, like, we want everyone to be nice to one another. Just be nice. Don't say anything mean. We want a Christian support club, which means you can do whatever you want and I support you.
Sure.
In whatever decision you're making. And that is not loving. And so I think what the person is saying is like, how do I go from cheering you on and loving you in a traditional nice way to being confrontational in a way that says I'm calling out sin for what it is? And I think that's probably where they're going. Pastor Mo, what do you think about that? Like, when do you call someone out in sin, and how do you do it in a loving way?
Oh man, I think different answers for dependent on the person.
Right.
First question is, are they a believer or not?
Right.
if they're not a believer, I think of Paul when he says, who are we to judge those outside of the household of God?
That's nice.
So I think
That's where you be nice,
That's
if you
where you
will.
be nice.
Yeah.
You don't affirm their sin and you call it out when you have the opportunity to. But I think once you've done it once, you've done your job, personally for
Right.
me.
Yeah, no,
That's how I see that for those who are not Christians. If you are a Christian, you got steps. You go to them person to person. Then if they don't listen, you bring a brother with
Matthew
you.
18.
And then you continue escalating it, bringing it in front of the whole church.
Right.
And the hope and all of that always is
Restoration.
Restoration.
Yeah.
What about you, Jordan? When you hear this question about, like, how do I confront somebody that is even hurting me? Because I think that's where I'm close to this person. I don't want to be a doormat. Like, how do you shift from being nice to being loving to being honoring? Does that make sense? What do you think for you is that shift? What does that look like for you?
I think for me, it's all based on relationship with the person. Like, if someone's calling you out on sin and you don't even know them, like, it's not going to hit as hard as someone who is your brother or sister and
Right.
calling you out that you've had a long-standing relationship
Right.
with. I think the people who love you the most are going to be the ones who call you out the most as
Right.
well. They don't want to be people-pleasing. Like, you need to have those people in your life that are going to call you out, and you have to be willing to receive that, which is probably the harder part as well. As far as not being a doormat, I think it's just about being able to accept those things, those kind of rebukes or anything, but also just you have to trust, like you said, trust God. Don't just be a doormat. Like, God is going to work in any situation, regardless of how someone responds, and you just kind of have to trust that.
I love that.
If you call someone out on something and they stop talking to you or whatever, it's like, okay, but God is still working on them, even if you're not communicating with them at that point.
Yeah, and if we're talking about spouses, which is probably what, a lot of people go this direction, you've got to bring up the reality of, like, it's okay to bring a third person in to even navigate some of spouse, because that's two believers. If a wife feels like her husband is not loving her in a way that Christ loves the church, then that's why she has the church. There is no the problem with marriage. There is no the clause of, if you don't love me like Christ loves the church, I get to not obey you. I get to not do whatever. But the beauty is, the church is the thing that is the organization, is the organism, is the body that's going to come in, because and enforce that, I guess, because there's no enforcement clause in your marriage vows. It's like you say a whole bunch of stuff, I love you, unless no one says that. And even if you did, that's just weird and not biblical. But so that's where the church comes in and helps, and that's what the church is supposed to do. And so if we can be, before people come to me and like they just say, hey, I'm getting divorced, it'd be great if you came to the church and come to your community group shepherd, came to bring friends in. This is why we do life with community. Because if you don't have community, you don't have anyone to bring in and say, like, I need you to speak truth to me, because the way that I'm seeing this is that I am loving her, I am loving him in a way that's honoring, but they're not perceiving it that way, and I need some insight on where I might be wrong here. And that, when you're able to do that, it changes the conversation from I'm being a doormat, because probably in the one-on-one conversations, there's probably some stuff you need to own in that. But when you bring another party in, which is what the Bible calls us to do, it allows you to get perspective, which is probably most needed. All right, so hey, listen, we love questions. And so if you have any questions, go to pastorplek.com or text in at 737-231-0605. We would love to answer all your questions.
Hey, Chris, I got one thing
hit
real
it.
quick. Just based on that last question, a thing that came to my mind is, I don't know, when this person said, when is enough enough? Would you ever advocate for going no contact with someone?
Well, if
Or
there's
is that-
physical abuse, you before you get to, this is where we does somebody come up and just straight up punch somebody in the face? I mean, maybe if they're doing that, you probably wouldn't have a relationship with them. Usually it's going to escalate. And before it escalates for physical stuff, you want to sort of bring in the church. But if somebody hits you or hurts you or abuses you, then run to the church and be like, I need help. Like I feel like this is like the Middle Ages, run to the church and go sanctuary. But like that's the answer there, is that you run to the church. And when we've had women call us and say, I'm afraid right now. And elders showed up at the house at like 11:30 at night. And then like, oh, just kidding. It wasn't anything. And we're just like. So like the church is ready to respond. It's just nobody asks, and maybe nobody thinks to ask. That might be because I think in our culture, you don't want anybody in your business.
Sure.
But what Christ's church is supposed to be is in your business.
100%.
And I think that's the part where we struggle because we're afraid of what if they, and again, it goes back to you fear man more than you fear God. And so therefore a glass house is not something you're wanting to live in. And I totally get it. In the world, that's totally stupid, but in Christ, it's totally safe.
Can I also address the boundaries part of this question
Yeah.
really quick? I think sometimes there's some confusion when it comes to boundaries where people think they have to be really harsh and hardline, and that's just not the case. You can honor someone while still having firm boundaries, and you can put boundaries in place while being kind
Right.
to someone. And
Right.
like a boundary is just saying like, hey, I'm not comfortable with like you're pushing me too much. I'm not comfortable with how you're speaking to me, or
Right.
like I'm not comfortable with doing that. Like it's communicating what like what you're willing and able to do. It's not about pushing someone out of your life.
Right. And I think one of the things I like to do is I said, I know you don't intend to come off this way. However, this is the way I received it, and I don't think that you intended that. But just so you know, I was hurt by that, blah, blah, blah. That goes miles because it takes the, it doesn't put the person on the defense. You hurt me. It goes off, hey, man, the way I perceived this was. And usually the person goes, oh, I never meant to say something like that. Oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. And then you give somebody an out as opposed to hammer somebody and be like, you're an
Yeah.
awful human being. And that never goes well.
Right.
All right, any other thoughts?
No.
All right, hey guys, thanks for listening. If you want to join the conversation, see us at pastorplek.com, pastorplek.com. And so from our house to yours, have an awesome week of worship.